Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. On today's show, we're talking about the peril of thinking small. This past weekend, I was at a conference in Dallas where I heard a similar question over and over again. And the question related to scaling from where you are today. Most of these investors were starting out small. Imagine you're going to dig a hole for a big apartment building. It's a really big hole. So some people think it's a good idea to start digging now, but all they have is a single shovel. Since the paradigm is a single shovel, then clearly the path to scaling is eventually to have a small army with 100 shovels. The problem with that thinking, of course, is obvious. It's not going to take long before you hit a rock too large for any hand shovel to deal with. Even 100 hand shovels won't solve the problem. Instead, a smarter path involves taking the extra time to plan bringing in a large excavator. It's going to require an operator and a high hourly rate. But the excavator will bypass the hand shovels in a few minutes once it gets going. The same thinking seems to be pervasive in newer real estate investors. The question is based on the notion of incremental improvement from a small portfolio. This is linear thinking. In that world, the thinking goes something like this. I'm going to start small and grow organically. We're going to grow from 1 staff member to 2 to 3 and eventually grow to having a sizable business. They'll start small with single-family homes and then add duplexes and then triplexes and eventually small multifamily buildings with the hope that eventually they'll have a sizable portfolio and graduate to large apartment complexes. But the problem with this type of thinking is exactly the same as the shovels. You're going to get stuck. These are all active businesses, and every active business requires that you have no less than a minimum of 7 critical functions. It's not possible to run a sustainable business with less than those 7 roles. Sometimes it's possible to double up on a couple of those roles with the same individual, but that rarely works. Now, I know what you're thinking. You haven't figured out how to fund your lifestyle for your own family. How on earth are you going to fund the income stream for at least 7 families? And the problem stems from the fact that you're starting with small projects. The projects themselves are so small, they don't generate enough revenue to afford the necessary skills to run an effective and sustainable business. Most importantly, the breadth of skills don't exist within a single person to fulfill all those roles. And even if they did, if you magically had all of those skills within your brain, there would not be enough hours in the day to accomplish it all, and you would be still relegated to having a tiny business. And I can tell you with perfect humility that for me to build a single-family home takes the exact same effort as it takes to build a 100-unit apartment building or a 250-unit apartment building. All other things being equal, I get a better return on my time with the 100-unit or the 250-unit apartment complex as compared with a single unit. The larger project will afford all the skills you need to have a sustainable business. So in fact, it's easier to go bigger, and I know that sounds counterintuitive. The problem with growing an organization in the world of real estate investing is that many of the revenue streams involve deferred compensation. Many developers don't get paid until the end of a transaction. So how do you fund the hiring ahead of the revenue curve? And that's where a lot of people seem to get stuck. The key is to ensure that your developer fees form an important part of your development plan and your project budget, without which you don't have sufficient income stability to fund the skills needed. You don't have the income stability to fund the vital functions. See, the only way this works is by working on projects that are capable of throwing off enough cash to fund the breadth of skills without adversely hampering the deal. The goal is not to get rich off of fees. See, when fees become too large a percentage of the cost associated with doing a project, the profitability of the project is compromised. Investors will take exception if the fees to run the project are too high. But if you're running a $20 million or $30 million construction project, might be 150 or a couple hundred units, your developer fee could be 2% of the project cost. You might be able to allocate $500,000 in developer fees to fund the hiring. That's certainly enough money to hire a decent amount of talent so that you have the breadth of skills necessary to execute properly on those projects. I see far too many aspiring investors trying to squeak by with part-time team members. It's almost impossible to build a sustainable business and sustainable systems with rented talent. But the obstacle to doing larger projects for many investors is raising capital. They just don't know how to do it. And developing that one critical skill holds the key to the kingdom. And then when you figured out how to raise the capital, you have to get over the mental hurdle. You're going to pay yourself a small salary out of that capital raise. Not to get rich off of fees, but to feed the vital functions. In fact, it would be highly irresponsible to try and do a large project on a shoestring. You would not be acting as a good steward of your investors' funds. Imagine for a moment that even a critical team member gets a mild case of COVID and is out of commission for a few weeks. That could seriously hamper a project. So you've got to have the ability to fund sufficient bench depth that you can have a sustainable business. Even if somebody was to get sick or go away on vacation, you need that bench depth. This is not a game for amateurs. We're talking about moving into the big leagues for the pros. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.